those flows have been rapid and they've built up a head of steam as well. Patrick talks of a pendulum swinging as well, where eventually I guess we're going to reach a tension point where it's going to come back aggressively, is part of Patrick's point as well. How do you feel about that and what it means for flow into passive and into ETF?
Yeah, I think there are probably two parts to it. I think one is we are seeing a big flow into passive. I think we're still in the stage where the pendulum is very much on the side of the majority of money still sits in the active space. So I still think that there is a way to go in terms of what passive could take up on. But I think there's also a change in the definitions of what we actually mean by active and passive, because if you think about ETFs in particular, the majority of bond ETFs, we're actually seeing the big growth by active investors. So the shift in mindset between being a choice between active and passive and being a toolkit of actually, when we think about beta isn't just a big block, it's granular.
Let me go back one station and then Patrick and Karen will come in. What do you mean when you say active managers are now, did you say avid buyers pretty much of fixed income ETF product?
So let's say you're running a global fixed income portfolio, and you want to get exposure to US high yield, or emerging market debt's been a good example this year.
Yes.
Probably the easiest way now to buy US high yield is to buy a US high yield ETF. And so if you think about running that portfolio, you've got different levels of decision. You've got the decision of where is my overall exposure? Do I want to be overweight US high yield or investment grade credit or US treasuries? And then I've got my bottom up kind of stock or bond selection. And I think that what we're seeing, given the challenges in the bond markets, which is becoming harder and harder to actually trade bonds, buy bonds when you're building portfolios, you're seeing this blend of tools. So I say, okay, if I want to make a quick decision to buy high yield, I want to be able to buy something, I need that market on demand. That's what an ETF gives me.
If I can buy an ETF product that's supposed to be mirroring the underlying bonds, but I can't buy the underlying bonds, about the liquidity of the ETF if there is a moment of tension, i.e., if I can't buy the bond product, but I go to the ETF, okay, that's great. I've got this. I've still got the exposure. But then, if the liquidity of the underlying product gets worse in a moment of tension, where's my out on the ETF?
So I think two things happen. One is when I think about I can't buy the bonds, I can't buy the explicit list of bonds I want. So how do I get that overall exposure first, and then maybe tweak that by buying selected bonds that I want? And the second aspect is that when we talk about ETFs, as we've discussed before, there's two layers of liquidity. So you have the underlying bond market, but you also have the fact that this is a new venue for people to be able to transact, to be able to transfer risk. And where we have seen market tension, again, US high yield was a good example back in December, you're having buyers and sellers, it's a new venue. So a lot of that volume actually picks up in a market which isn't necessarily having to touch the underlying bond market.
What you're also talking about is herding. We keep talking about crowded trades, and if active managers are buying the same ETFs because they want exposure to the same part of the market, then this is exactly what we're talking about, why you're having abundance of trades in one area where there should be a more diversified trade. This is a part of the problem, isn't it, that we're seeing on markets herding?
I wouldn't say so, because I think you've got to think about, we're now at a point where, as we reach with equity ETFs, we're now at a point with bond ETFs, where actually these things are pretty granular.